Recording started.
All right, before I start, let me take a quick, who has not managed to get their textbook yet?
Keep them up right now.
You got yours? Is that because they ran out or because you haven't been yet?
It's cheaper right now.
It is cheaper online.
Yeah, on yours.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Even if you make it like overnight delivery, it's still going to be cheaper than going to the bookstore.
I have a question. So on our free quiz, can you still send it to them? Oh, yeah.
No, because some people haven't. Has anybody not taken the free quiz?
Even if it's closed.
It's
It's
closed.
closed now,
That's what that's all.
but some people haven't been able. In my other class, people haven't been able to buy a book because they ran out. So that's why I'm checking, because if they've run out and you can't take the pre-quiz, I will reopen it. If you just didn't go and get your book, that's your problem. So what I will do, so just to let you know how this works, I go in and check every pre-quiz because it's a computer, not a person, and whilst they tell us they're smart, they're not that smart. If I put a capital letter in the answer and you spelt it with a small letter, it tells you you got it wrong. So I will go in and check every pre-quiz for typos, or if you like spell the word wrong, you'll get it wrong. So I'll check them all, and you actually should, I set it up so that after the deadline, you would be able to go in and see the answers. So you should be able to go back in now the deadline is done and look at those answers, all right? And then just trust me, if you got the answer right and it told you you got it wrong, I will correct it, okay? All right. Any other things like that? Okay. Has anybody bought a book today? Yesterday? Do we know if there are books on the bookshelf? If when you go to the bookstore there aren't books, you need to let me know. Because I ordered 25. And that is not the case in motor behavior apparently. There was only like 10 on the shelf. So,
I mean, all of them, they have a lot. They have like 6 or 7.
oh, these?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Start of semester. There's always these little glitches that aren't supposed to happen. Okay. All right, so we are going to start with chapter 12 for a couple of reasons. One, having told you on Monday that we have to start with the chemistry, biology, abstract stuff. And we will. I actually like to start with something that's very hands-on so that kind of get you going. Also, if we consider your physical activity logs, some of you may have body composition goals that you want to set for your physical activity log. So I like to cover that material early so that if you do want to set that kind of goal, that you've got an idea of what would be appropriate. Okay? All right. So, the learning objectives in this class, I have the learning objectives as the first slide for each chapter's PowerPoint. Always double check them back to the textbook because sometimes I take some out. There are some things in the textbook that are just so technical that when I'm working with people who are going to be PE teachers or coaches or athletic trainers, you don't need to do the stuff that you would do if you were going to go to a biology master's program, okay? So don't spend time learning stuff you don't need to learn, okay? Just match. It's not every chapter, but some chapters I do take out several of those objectives, and that's then an indicator you can ignore that. All right, so this next slide is not going to work because we're now in, so when I'm not doing the lecture for the online students, this comes in as a fly-in. Now it just smothers all the writing. So this is looking at definitions of, so the kind of verbiage that you would use, all right? So there are several different models for looking at body composition. The exercise physiology book that we use just uses a very simple two-component model. So we are either looking at fat mass or we are looking at fat-free mass. All right, fat-free mass is everything: skin, bones, muscles, organs, the works. All right. There are other models that split it into 3 or 4 components, but it's unlikely that you would ever be in a work situation where you had access to the equipment that it would take to split it into more than 2 components, and so I don't look at those. All right? So one of the first ideas that we have to kind of get our head around is that standing on the scale is a really bad way of measuring your athletes or your students or your clients, all right? Because when I stand on the scale, all it tells me is my body mass. It doesn't tell me anything about my body, all right? And during the semester, we'll look at other measures, but we'll talk about things like BMI. BMI is a big problem, particularly if you're a coach working with athletes, because BMI only takes into consideration an individual's height and their mass, right? And so athletes very often classify as obese or overweight when they compare themselves to a BMI chart, which they're not, because they're athletes, right? They're strong, and they've got heavy, dense bones and big muscles, which is really, really good for long-term health, okay? So using a scale is a problem. There'll be one instance in the whole semester where I say this is when you should use a scale, right? Other than that, scales are a big, big problem, quite apart from the fact that they give people low self-esteem, right? You stand on the scale and you're like, oh my God, I put on 3 pounds this Christmas, right? Then when I do my body composition, I went down 1.5% in fat mass and up 1.5% in muscle mass. So that's a good thing, but if I hadn't done the body composition and I stood on the scale like, oh my God, right? This is not very happy making. So this diagram is a really simple indicator of this idea, all right? We have 2 men who both weigh the same amount. They're both 90 kilos, okay? And they used an underwater weighing example, which we unfortunately don't, even though we have a pool, we don't have an underwater weighing machine, which is a problem that I would like to address over the next year or so. There's got to be funding somewhere that I can find that we could get one of these. So we do an underwater weighing, and the chap on the left is 4 kilos underwater. And the chap on the right is 6 kilos underwater. Okay? They're both 90 kilos on land. Right? So when you use an algorithm, which luckily we don't have to calculate, we can just plug numbers in, it works out that the gentleman on the left has a fat mass of 23%. Right? And the gentleman on the right has a fat mass of 12%. Okay? So he's heavier underwater because muscle weighs more than fat. Right? So his fat-free mass is 88% of his 90 kilos, and this gentleman's fat mass is 77% of his, fat-free mass is 77% of his 90 kilos. So he's significantly more fat, even though he's the same weight, right? So it's a very silly example, but it makes the point, I think, right? That we have to use other ways of determining whether our athletes or our clients or our students are healthy, right? How much fat is healthy? How much muscle is healthy? What about bone density, right? How are we going to structure the program depending upon who the individual is if we want to improve bone density, right? If I improve bone density, they're going to get heavier. Is that going to be a problem? What sport are they trying to do? Okay? So there's lots of questions that come up when we start to talk about body composition. Okay? So right now, there is a lot of funding available to look at obesity and overweight problems in America. And obesity is now classified by the Center for Disease Control as epidemic, and it's now considered a disease rather than just a state. And if we go back to our BMI numbers, because those are the figures that you often see and are used by schools and clinicians, overweight would be a BMI of 25 to 29.9, and obese is anything 30 and above. All right? But as I say, that classification with BMI is problematical. Right? You shouldn't use it as a tool to identify whether someone is overweight. Right? Because it doesn't always tell the truth. Okay? So, these figures are a little bit out of date. Somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 people die in the States alone from obesity, overweight related issues. So cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, stroke, things like that. And approximately 3/4 of the adults in the States are overweight or obese, and 35%, and that number is going up a little bit, are obese. Okay? So when you hear statements like New Mexico Department of Health will say, oh, our overweight obesity statistics have flatlined. That's true if you look at the two categories together, but the percentage within that flat line of people who are now obese rather than overweight has gone up. Right? So you have to start to be slightly clever with your reading and your understanding. Watch the language that's being used. because they can hide bad statistics by using clever language, all right? And that goes the same when we look at things like protein drinks and when we're looking at nutritional supplements and there's lots of clever language out there to try to make you believe something that isn't quite the picture, all right? So, given that diets are like a major thing, right? You walk into Walmart and there's diet supplements everywhere. You look at the magazines and they're smothered with pictures and stories about people losing weight, all right? And yet, the numbers of people with obesity is really going up. A lot of those supplements and magazines are targeted at women, but more and more, they're starting to target men, right? So we've got to kind of start to be critical consumers, really. Can we sort out what's true from what's marketing? I'm going to turn the light off. If I turn the light off, Brandon, can you tell me if you can see the colors on these graphs?
Yeah, it's good.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. So, this is the historical picture, and this is why it's such a problem now, why people are really starting to be worried about it. Those of you that have had 212 with me will know that we're worried enough to cancel PE and recess, right? That's how worried we are right now. So, it's all a load of this and no actual action right now. But it will change. It's going to take a while, but it will change. 1995. So, the blue is 10 to 14% of the population considered obese. Okay? The kind of browny orange is 15 to 19%. Right? So not too bad back in the 90s. We get to 2000, and now we only have one state, Colorado, regularly comes out top of the health lists for many indicators. There's a lot of money in Colorado. It's easy to be healthy when you've got a lot of money. Okay? So Colorado's the only one that's holding its ground. Okay? All the ones that were 10 to 14 are now up to 15 to 19, and now we've got a whole new group of 20 to 24% of the population obese. 2005, nobody is blue anymore, not even Colorado, right? And now we have a new color. Purple is over 30% of the population are obese. And then we get to 2010. And I haven't found the map for 2015. Right? So, you know this is not a pretty picture. Okay? And the only way to tackle it is through physical activity and diet, nutritious, right? The word diet is misused in the regular language. Diet does not mean lose weight. Diet means the food I eat, right? So those are the only ways to impact this in the long term. We have to change people's habits of physical activity, and we have to change their eating habits. Right? Nothing else is going to work. Everything else is short-term or fake. Right? If I want to lose 10 pounds and next year I still want to be 10 pounds lighter, the only way to do it is through what I eat and how much I move. Yes?
So, like, how would you change the whole population like that?
Therein lies the problem, Bryce. Yeah, it's really, really difficult. And this is, This is very complicated. It's very simple to say, oh, people are lazy and they eat too much. We're going to look at that. It's actually way more complicated than that, because you have cultures changing people's eating habits when culturally their food is high fat, fried. It's very, people don't like, I grew up with that. That makes me feel good. It makes me feel part of my community. You can't just say, oh, you can't eat that anymore, right? That doesn't work. So it's very complicated there's a really big push on the reservations at the moment because the reservations have a very, very high rate of type 2 diabetes. I actually have a set, they brought out a beautiful set of children's books that are all built around Native American stories and characters to try to teach the children on the reservations about being more active and choosing, not eating their cultural food, but choose not eating it all the time is the problem, right? That's the problem. I mean, I'm not giving up my tub of ice cream, but I only eat one a week. That's good, right? I need a little one. But I eat one a week. I'm not giving it up. I like it. Right? So it's hard to change people's eating habits. Personally, I think it's a little easier to change people's activity habits, especially when we have research that shows that activity can start out at a 10 to 15 minute walk. Because telling someone they have to exercise for an hour, who has an hour? I didn't even eat my lunch, right? So who has an hour? But I have 10 minutes. So I think, as the movement people, you can have a huge influence when you get out to work. That's what I believe. You're going to have a massive influence. So back in 2000, when this picture came out, and everyone went, oh my God, what's going on? All right, so we're going to have Healthy People 2010. And the government is going to have a whole list of expectations for each state to meet Healthy People 2010, right? We get to 2010, not one single state met the goals for Healthy People 2010. So now we have Healthy People 2020. So we will see in another year how many states met the expectations for Healthy People 2020. I'm thinking not very many, right? But I'm also thinking that's why we're starting to hear the flatline conversation, because if they flatline, maybe they're closer to the Healthy People 2020. Right? I'm not cynical. So in New Mexico, about 30% of kindergartners are overweight or obese. 30% of little people, right? And if you are overweight at the age of 8, you have a 60% chance of becoming an overweight adult. So our 30% of kindergartners who are already overweight and they're not 8 yet, don't stand very much chance, okay? It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. In fairness, New Mexico is one of the states down the bottom of the table. Right? Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, New Mexico. Right? No money. Anywhere where there's no money, the people are not healthy. Okay? So, the concern with can be overweight to a point and still be healthy. You can, right? There, you can take aerobics classes, you can ride a bike, you can swim, you can be a healthy person and be somewhat overweight. It's very difficult to be a healthy person when you're obese because that's a lot of mass to move around, right, for any length of time. So the big problem is not that someone is obese, doesn't make them a bad person, right? They're a human being, they've got a life and a family, and the problem is the quality of life or the risk of death at an early age, right? So we have a nice big list of things that are connected to being overweight or obese. Doesn't mean you can't get these if you're not overweight and obese, because they all have an element of genetic background underlying them. Doesn't mean that if you're obese, you're going to get any of these, because you may not have the genetic marker that gets turned on, right? So it's not a rule, it's an overall picture, okay? Then we come to the really complicated bit. What's the cause? Right? If we know that being overweight and obese is a problem because it has all these negative effects on your health, why is it happening? Right? It is true that overeating leads to increased fat deposits. Right? However, there is more and more information coming out about the genetic drive, right? So, for example, some people are not able to make leptin. Leptin is responsible for breaking down fat that is stored in fat cells. So if I can't make leptin, then I'm not physically able to be lean, right? And it's got nothing to do with whether I'm eating too much or, does that make sense, right? We also see, for some people, that at a certain weight for their size, that you start to see an alteration in the brain's understanding of hunger, okay? So when you eat Thanksgiving dinner, right, and we all pig out on turkey and stuffing and vegetables and pumpkin pie, and about half an hour later you're sitting with Buddha belly on the couch going, oh my God, I ate too much. Right, and you get that uncomfortable. Some people don't get that, right? The signal from the stretch receptors in the stomach that tell the brain that you've had enough to eat don't do their job. And so they never feel full up, right? Well, if I don't feel full up, why would I stop eating? Okay? So it's really, really complicated. Of course, physical inactivity plays a role for most people, not all people. You can't tarnish everybody and say, well, they're just lazy, they don't move, right? They may move, they may not move enough, right? Or it may not be that that's causing the problem when we look at the bigger picture. So then we've got cultural food issues, we've got fast food chains, we've got an ever-expanding portion size. So if you buy a pizza at Pizza Hut in America and you get a medium-sized pizza, then you go to London and you buy a medium-sized pizza in Pizza Hut in London, it's about that size, right? So England will follow where America goes, the UK does follow. So we'll go there, but the size of the portions in your fast food chain here are huge. Then you've got places that go, oh, all you can eat 4, right? Which is great when you're a student, because you can pay $5 and you can keep going back to the buffet, right? And you can actually get a meal for $5. But it also encourages you to overeat, because you paid your $5 and there's all this food and you can have whatever you like, as much as you like. Right? So if you don't use a little bit of discipline and go, okay, I don't need 3 pieces of cake or 5 pieces of chicken, I just need 2, right? Okay? A large, so if you buy one of those large Mac meals, you've got a large burger, a large fries, a large fizzy drink, maybe an apple pie, I don't know, I've lost track. Right? That's about 1,800 calories. That's more calories than my little friend here in the front, if she was doing an office job, would need in an entire day. Because she's a small little, right? 1,800 calories in one meal. And some people have it for breakfast. Right? Or in the afternoon, they just stop at the drive-thru for a snack. 1,800 calories. It's insane. All right? So, it gets even more complicated, because not only are there some elements that aren't necessarily under your control, but that certain people have to deal with, we also have the fact that where you deposit your fat within your body plays a role in how healthy or unhealthy you might be. Okay? So when we lay fat deposits around our trunk here, it's called central or android or visceral, apple-shaped, right? It's typically male, but I have to say this is my sister. Long skinny legs, high cheekbones, thin neck, all her weight is here. So you can, right, you can get men that do this and you can get women that do this. But apple-shaped is typically male, okay? This visceral obesity, so when we lay fat cells down around our organs in our trunk, around our liver, right, around our kidneys, around our stomach, this is much more strongly linked with the disease list, particularly coronary artery disease and type 2 diabetes. The other version, gynoid, is subcutaneous obesity. So it's the stuff that you can pinch that lies right underneath your skin. Typically more female, particularly around the thighs and that Kardashian booty, right? And subcutaneous obesity is not as strongly linked with our disease list. Okay. So it's not just the being overweight, it's the where am I overweight? Where am I carrying the weight? If it's on my arms and my legs, then my health risk is relatively low. If it's all here, then my health risk is very high. And surprise not, my sister was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 6 years ago, right? But that's where she had carried her weight since we were here. That's just where it went, right? So she didn't stand much of a chance, unfortunately. Okay, so we're running a little behind, so on Friday I'll try to not have a meeting at lunchtime that then goes for 2 hours. And I might have to talk a little bit quick just to catch us up. Okay? So we will continue here.